All right. Well, I think we'll go ahead and begin, and I'm gonna start by introducing myself. So, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Matt Mearsman, and I serve as the director of the St. Joe River Basin Commission. Um, Technically, I'm an employee of the Michiana Area Council of Governments, or MACOG. The MACOG serves the St. Joe River Basin through a partnership agreement. For those of you who know me, you know that I found my dream job leading the commission. The St. Joe River that I'm standing in front of, I born and raised here in South Bend, Indiana, just a few blocks from the river, grew up playing in it. When I was a kid, my grandparents got a lake cottage way over by Coldwater, Michigan. We used to go up there every weekend, and that 2-hour drive seemed so long as a kid. And I remember just being blown away when I realized that that water that I was swimming in at the lake cottage in Coldwater was coming all the way back here to South Bend. That just blew my mind, and that was my introduction into this watershed concept. And now here I am living across the street from the river, and I was out on it this morning. My passion for doing this work comes from a love of being on and in the water. And just around the corner behind me is the East Race Whitewater Way, where I spend time playing in my whitewater kayak. And out paddling on the river this morning. This is what I love to do, is being on the water. So it's a real easy a job to do it. I feel blessed to be able to do that. So I'm going to get more into the commission later, but what I want to let you all know is that we've got a lot of folks sort of behind the scenes that are helping us today, and I think I want to give them an opportunity to introduce themselves. And while they do that, although now the wind's kind of calming down, I was kind of wanting to stay out here, kind of thinking about moving inside for my presentation in case the wind noise was distracting. I'm going to actually ask Eric to let me know at this point if you think I should move in or if you think I am all right to stay here. Maybe Leah, would you give me the go on? Do you think I should stay out here? Or you think I should move in? What do you think?
Right now it's not bad, but if it gets bad, we'll let you know.
I think it's great.
All right, thanks, Kieran. I'm going to go ahead and stay out here at the risk of having some wind noise. I'll keep myself muted if I'm not the one talking, but I think I'm going to go ahead and try it. And by all means, panelists who are about to introduce themselves, let me know at any point. I can move in. It'll only take about 3 minutes to move inside if this wind noise becomes obnoxious, okay? All right, so with that, I guess we'll start with Leah.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Leah Hill. I'm the environmental planner with MACOG. MACOG is the Michiana Area Council of Governments. So I help out sometimes with the Symposium and the quarterly meetings, moral support, administrative tasks. Most of my work does have to do with water, but I find it really interesting to meet all of you and see what you're up to. Although most of my work is more on other topics like brownfields and energy transportation. So, Alicia, I believe you're up next. Introduce yourself.
Hi. Yep. Thank you, Leah. My name is Alicia Vedi. I'm the administrator of the Steuben County Health Department up in Angola, Indiana. I am the proxy for Dr. Ted Chrisman, who is our health officer here in Steuben County. I deal with quite a bit, and I have been working with the St. Joe River Basin Commission, I think, for around 2 years now, and this is my first year as serving for the board as treasurer for 2020. And on that note, I'll pass it off to Kristen Thomas.
Thank you, Alicia. Good morning, everybody. I'm the MS4 coordinator and floodplain administrator for the city of Angola, and I've been with the St. Joe River Basin Commission for about approximately 2 years, serving the city of Angola. I'm currently the secretary for the commission, and I serve as the proxy for the mayor, who is Richard Hickman. And with that, I'll send it to Dara.
Thanks, Chris. My name is Dara Deegan. I am the vice chair with the River Basin Commission. I work for the city of Elkhart as an aquatic biologist and do biological surveys on the St. Joe River in Elkhart and St. Joseph counties. I am the proxy for Mayor Rod Robertson in Elkhart. And I think that's pretty much it. And with that, I think I'll pass it over to Kieran.
Thanks, Dara. So I'm Kieran Fahey. I'm work with the City of South Bend, and I also serve as the chairman of the River Basin Commission. So not as involved as like Matt is. It's not an executive kind of a role. Anyway, so I'm, like I said, Kieran Fahey, and I've been with the River Basin Commission now for gosh, about 4.5 years at this stage. And just a little bit about the commission. First of all, like many of you will be very familiar with it. Obviously, you're here today, but perhaps some of you are a little bit less familiar about what is the commission, and who is the commission, what is the commission, and where is the commission really? You know, so it's really my title is the director of long-term control planning at the City of South Bend. So really, the idea about that is if you think about the word planning and about having a plan, and lots of us river cities do, and mine is specifically in relation to how the city interacts with the river, really in relation to wet weather events. So obviously, many other cities have plans like this too to manage their interaction. So it's really the St. Joseph River Basin Commission is really there to provide. It's a forum for discussion, for study, for evaluation. It's about fostering cooperation, really. It's not any kind of, although it is a legislative body and it is established in legislation, it's not like a hard kind of a legislative enforcement team. It's all about fostering cooperation and really getting people to do joint up thinking as you know, as we exist along the river. So the members of the commission, then it's really, obviously it's the St. Joseph River Basin Commission, but it's the Indiana side of it, really, to be frank. St. Joseph County, Elkhart County, Kosciuszko, Noble, Steuben, and LaGrange County. And from those counties, there's the mayor of each second-class city, or the executive of the municipality. So I represent the mayor of South Bend, James Mueller. I'm a proxy on the board myself. The county commissioner, health officer, county surveyor, and a representative of the Soil and Water Conservation District, and also the director of Indiana Department of Natural Resources. So I'm not looking into the more specific details about it. But I just want to say this morning, first of all, I hope everybody's well, obviously, at the moment, what we're all going through. And I think also I just want to say that in the River Basin Commission, it has really been kickstarted in the last, although we've been around for a long time, and Mike can tell us exactly how long. I think it's perhaps the late 80s, Matt, is it, or something like that. The River Basin Commission has really been kickstarted over the last like couple of years since Matt Mears has been involved. And I think we are all, the best thing about the River Basin Commission is having Matt as our coordinator and the director of the commission. The energy that Matt brings to us and the work that he has done has absolutely been phenomenal over the last few years. And I know we're only starting off today, but just to give a note of recognition to Matt for the hard work that he has done over the last couple of years, and to really, we've had good people working with us in the past, but to say that what we're doing in the commission has become so relevant in the past, in the present, over the last couple of years. In the past, there was moments when you're, you know, trying to get stuff done and you know, make sure that everybody's coordinated in their work schedules and make sure that the commission is as tangible and practical in its successes as can be. And since Matt has joined, we've had a lot of success, and commission has, you know, some of the legislation has changed. It's not just about water quality anymore, but it's about water quality now, which is a massive change to the commission. But very excited for today. I know Matt's a great presenter, much better than I am, and I'm very excited to hear what he has to say, and also hear from Eric as well. So good morning, everybody, and thanks for joining us today, and a special thanks to Matt for his hard work, and all the best. Thank you.
Thank you, Kieran. Really, I'm lucky and humbled by your words, but lucky to have such a great group of folks on the commission to work for. So the folks that just introduced themselves, other than Leah, who's my partner at Mccoy, are all officers of the St. Joe River Basin Commission, and they'll be serving as panelists today. So they're kind of behind the scenes, and if you have questions, they can help to try to answer them while I'm talking. And so I appreciate you guys doing that. I guess you know, Kieran touched on the purpose of the River Basin Commission, and I think I want to emphasize the purpose of the symposium. So the purpose of the St. Joe River Basin Symposium is to bring together all the stakeholders from the Indiana side of the basin and the Michigan side of the basin together. But here I am, And there you are. And this is as together as we can get right now, and it's certainly less than ideal. I know that for me, it's something that I'm really struggling with and trying to make the best of it. But I think that it sort of makes today even more important in the sense that I think we all need some inspiration, something to be excited about. And I think the work that so many of us that are on the webinar here today do is worthy of our efforts. And I think Eric's going to share some stories with us that show that we're not alone. We really are not alone. We're doing this together, and I'm excited and again lucky to have found the best job I could have ever imagined. This is our 20th symposium. This is obviously a very different format, but this is the 20th annual symposium, and I am so excited to see Kieran Mccoy is here with us today. Karen put us where we are to be able to do a lot of the stuff that we've done, and she served the commission for a long time. And Karen got this started 20 years ago because she realized that like Kieran mentioned, the St. Joe River Basin Commission was created by the Indiana General Assembly, but its mission was always to bring the two states together. And you know, the governance and the funding of the commission is all on the Indiana side. Kieran mentioned all the folks on the Indiana side, but the mission is basin-wide. And there's a recognition that the two states have to come together to manage this resource if we're going to make a change. So I just want to thank you all for being here. I think that we're up to close to 90 participants on the webinar today, which is just incredible. I'm sort of curious about how many folks have been to symposiums before. And so one of the things that we're able to do with the webinar to try and create some kind of interaction is create a poll. And so I created a few polls today, and the first one that I'd like to put out there is have you been to a symposium before? Because although this format is severely limiting in terms of being able to bring people together, it has brought a whole bunch of folks I saw on the registration list that maybe have never been to a symposium before. So there's a poll that's just come up, and I hope you'll use it to let us know if you've been to one of these before. I was just thinking that, you know, it's hard to equal what we do in an in-person event, but we're going to do a number of things today. Like the polls are one thing. I think the chat feature, I keep referring, make sure you use the chat feature to let people know you're here and let them know your thoughts through that chat. That's really about the only way we have to interact with each other. So we got that poll up there. I think folks can submit, and at some point Eric will close that up on us, I guess. Before I go into the next thing, I'm kind of curious about how many folks are here who's been their first one. So if you can submit your answers there, and hopefully we can share the results with you. Maybe it's waiting on me to submit mine. I've been to more than one, but I can't remember how many. That's what it was. Sorry, I had to fill out my own poll. I just completed mine, so hopefully that's something we can share the results of with the group. If not, oh, there we go. Wow, so that's what we have 50%, wow, like 40 some people that are here today for their first symposium. Well, welcome. We're gonna have a great one, but when we can do this all together again in person, that is what we're shooting for. So very cool. Thanks for doing that for me, Eric. I guess the next thing that we got to talk about, I've done it already, but I got to talk about a word that Eric may tell us later that I should never use, but I have to do this at every single presentation I give, and that is this word watershed and watershed management. Jargon, yes. Important as a concept, critical. And so when we talk about watershed, we're talking about all the land that drains to any particular body of water. So this big river behind me has over 5,000 square miles of land that drain to it. And the reason that we care about where that land stops and starts is because if we're going to have any impact in the amount of water flowing through this river or the quality of it, we're going to have to look at what's going on the land. That basically when it comes down to it, now that the Clean Water Act has been passed, I almost hate to talk about this kind of stuff, but we've done a great job over the years of cleaning up our point source pollution. And so a large part of the remaining pollution issues that we have in our lakes and streams are related to runoff off of the land. That is the exact same source that's creating a lot of our flooding issues. So if we're going to have any impact on our lake that we care about so much, or the river, stream, creek that flows through your backyard, we got to look at what's going on the land and not just look at it, but hopefully affect it, make a difference, protect it maybe. If it's in good shape already, it's a wetland or it's some kind of vegetation, a way that we're promoting the infiltration of water. But if it's a hard surface that's sending water sideways, or it's a surface that has a bunch of nutrients and other things we don't want in the water applied to it, then we want to make sure that we put some kind of measures in place to reduce the amount of that stuff that gets into our lakes and streams. So when we talk about watershed management, we're talking about all kinds of activities that are mostly related to the land rather than the water. I think that the most important part of this is that if you're going to fix the lake, you're going to fix the creek, the river, you're probably not going to do it by working in the river. You're going to do it by working on the land that's draining to that. And so the St. Joe River Basin is another way to say watershed. Basin, the commission was created because there was an awareness that if we're going to impact this resource, we have to do it by looking at all the land that's draining. And we're very much interested and focused on not just the land on the Indiana side of the basin, but the Michigan side as well. So with that word, Eric, if you could launch my next slide that, oh, not quite yet. The slide that I was hoping to show folks was the watershed map there, but that's okay. So I guess, you know, I just mentioned the oh, there, almost. Well, there we go. All right, thank you. So we talk about watershed. I should have had this up while I was talking about it. That's my bad. I do appreciate Eric helping me with the slides. This area that's highlighted in blue is the area that I'm talking about. That's the area that we're concerned with as a commission. It's a gigantic area, 15 counties, 2 states. That area highlighted in blue is what we're talking about. So the poll that Eric was going to put up, which he can go ahead and do that, was just to get a sense. So we've got so much land draining to the St. Joe River that I'm very curious today. The purpose of this event, of course, being to bring together the 2 states. I'm curious about where your watershed management efforts occur. Now, before you hit submit, if you're sort of, what's my watershed management efforts? I don't know if I do any watershed management. Trust me, the term is incredibly broad. It includes all sorts of things. It could be choosing not to put fertilizer on your lawn this year. That's a watershed management effort. So what I want you to think about, if you do this stuff for work, where's that occurring at? But if it's on your property, something like that, then stick with that. So where, you know, when you make decisions that are affecting the way water leaves any land, your land, or if you work for the government, you work for a public entity, you're working with customers, where does that mostly take place? You're on the Michigan side, the Indiana side. I had to put the both states option in there for myself. I just submitted. And so if hopefully folks have had a chance to do that, if we could, kind of curious today, and normally we get a pretty good even split with this event. We've actually moved the location from Michigan, where it was held for, I think, 18 years, over to Indiana last year, opposite side of the basin. And it didn't seem to affect our distribution between the 2 states too much. So if we can get the results of that, we'll kind of have a good sense of where folks are from today. Wow, we do have a strong, so 64% of folks from Indiana and 22% from Michigan. So a little bit lower turnout on the Michigan side with this. Well, you know, it must be that Indiana's technology capabilities are just far exceeding those of Michigan. Or it could be that I've been spending so much of my time on the Indiana side of the basin over these last 4 years. I do miss seeing so many of my Michigan partners as regularly as I used to. So interesting. All right, we got a lot of Indiana folks. That's great, because a lot of the work that the commission does is on the Indiana side of the line. But what I'm going to talk about today are some projects that are bringing both states together, that are not just on the Indiana side. So let's see here. Okay, sorry. Just wanted to make sure I wasn't missing anything. So I mentioned some projects. You're looking at this map here. And the first one that I'm going to talk about is this Great Lakes Restoration Initiative funded project that we started with the Indiana DNR, the Michigan DNR, several local communities, Davie Resource Group, a bunch of folks to look at the urban tree canopy in 6 different communities in the St. Joe River watershed. So we got them really cool in the sense we had to pick small communities just because of the budget, so we weren't able to hit some of our big cities, but we were able to distribute it across the basin. And so what we're doing is looking at the urban tree canopy in these communities, and not just to see how good the coverage is, rather, you know, whether there's a good urban tree canopy in place, but in coming up with a plan to plant more trees in areas that would be especially critical for absorbing stormwater. So looking at topography, looking at the storm sewer system in some cases, if the community has stormwater pipes, which areas are served by the pipes, where the impervious or hard surfaces are, and making sure that we target our plantings to those areas. And then the grant has money to purchase for each community 50 2-inch caliper trees to be planted in their community in these strategic locations that were identified for stormwater infiltration. So the communities that we're working with, starting on the western side of the basin, on the Michigan side of the line, is the city of Buchanan, and then coming back onto the Indiana side, we've got the town of Middlebury in Elkhart County, which is on the Little Elkhart River. And then back up on the Michigan side of the line, but moving eastward in St. Joe County, we've got the city of Sturgis that we're working with. And then coming back over to Indiana down in Kosciuszko County, we're working with the town of Syracuse, which sits on Lake Wawasee. And what we found, so let me finish up by saying, then you get even further east into Branch County, Michigan, we'll work with the city of Coldwater, and then coming down into the extreme eastern portion of the basin in Indiana, we're working with the city of Angola. So those 6 partner communities, it's really incredible that we found as we've started this project that these communities are really leaders already when it comes to tree plantings and their sort of urban forestry plans. So it's really exciting to see what these communities are doing and being able to offer some assistance to them to improve what they've got going is really critical. And so the tree project is something that I think is exciting for us to be working on, bringing the 2 states together, offering some financial support to these communities. The next project that I'm going to talk about, if you look at that map, you'll notice that one of the streams, and by the way, you see that some of those streams and lakes are highlighted in red. And for those of you who've seen me give presentations before, you may know what that red is all about. It's always interesting to see people's guess if you want to enter in the chat box what those are, but I'll tell you in just one second. But before I tell you what the red colored streams are, if you'll notice, one of them is running right along the state line between Indiana and Michigan. Starts over there in Steuben County. In fact, its watershed is up into Branch County, but then it moves westward, goes up into Michigan, comes back down into Indiana, goes back to Michigan, then it comes back down into Indiana, and then it finally goes up to Michigan to meet the St. Joe River in Constantine. That river is the Fawn River, and the Fawn River, I've kind of taken it on as I don't know, it's special to me, and I find it special because it weaves its way between the 2 states, and that's something that I've been trying to do over the years, and was really excited about this opportunity to work on the Fawn River with the LaGrange County Soil and Water Conservation District. It's just in the early phases, but they were working on a project funded by the Great Lakes Commission to do sediment and erosion control in LaGrange County, primarily working with farmers to install livestock crossings, restrict cattle access from all the little streams and ditches that flow to the Fawn River. And we in talking with our partners there in LaGrange County, realized that there could be some opportunity to work across the line into St. Joe County on some basically access site improvements. people like me who love getting out on the water all the time, the Fawn River is an incredible stream to canoe and kayak on, and lots of people are doing that these days. And the access to the Fawn River has been really challenging. In the St. Joe County, Michigan Conservation District's been working hard with other partners there locally, the Parks Department, to install little access sites. And they've done a great job of securing places for folks to get in. But what we found is that some of those places are becoming maybe erosion sources themselves. And so we're looking to use some of that funding to improve some of those access sites, which should hopefully protect water quality in the river and give more people an opportunity to get out there on the Fawn River and see what's so special. It's kind of the heart of the St. Joe River Basin, and it's a great thing to be on. So I'm going to stop on that. I'm going to tell you that those red lines are not impaired waters. They are not the places I have drank beer. Those are the places that I have paddled in the last 10 years or so. So every one of those red lines I've covered, and I'm going to tell you that this map is way outdated. It's from 2019, and due to not being able to do anything but paddle over the last 2 months, there is all kinds of new red that should be on this map. So stay tuned for next time you see it. Hopefully it'll be updated and have lots. So I get around the basin. I love being out there on the water, and it really helps me to understand the issues that are going on. So I've got another poll that I'd like Eric to launch, and I just want to kind of mention how broad watershed management efforts are. They occur at all different scales, and we've got a lot of different people on the line today, and many of us that are lucky enough to work in watershed management, we do so at all these different scales. I love being able to wrap my arms around the whole watershed. Other folks that are involved with lake associations, they are working at a watershed scale. The Friends of a Certain Creek, that's a watershed scale. But many other people are working at the state level, or maybe you're involved in county government or municipal, city, town government. Or maybe you're just a property owner who's, put a rain barrel in and installed a rain garden. So I'm very curious if you had to pick. Hopefully you're working at the county level. Hopefully you're also doing some things on your property. But I guess I'm most curious about where you feel most of your watershed management, at what scale does that occur? So what I've done on my property is sadly not so great. My rain barrel is still sitting in the basement. Krista Bailey is I'm really embarrassed about that, Krista. And I will get it out there. But I'm working at the watershed scale primarily. My property I've disconnected those gutters. I'm not putting fertilizer down. I'm making some small changes, but I could do a whole lot more. So I'm curious what other folks are doing, or not so much what they're doing. Right, I am curious about that, but I'm curious at what scale the folks that are with us today are primarily working at. If folks submit their answers, we can kind of see. Appreciate the patience on this, waiting for me on these polls. I just wanted to give you all I know the wind noise is getting terrible. So we got folks voting. That's great. Of course I can't follow the chat, but I'm excited to get in there and see what all the terrible things that Dara has written about me in there. And then we're going to move on to one last poll after we see the results of this one, and then we're going to take a small break. And all right. Oh, good. I say good. I like to see a lot of folks thinking at that watershed scale. It's also good to see county and municipal well represented. So we got a really this is good, a good distribution, I feel. And the county is not surprising given the makeup of the River Basin Commission itself. We have a lot of people that are county representatives working at, county surveyors, the county health department, all those kinds of things. And that's actually leading into the last poll that I've got, Eric, which is to say there's so many different categories or buckets that we could put all this in. And I usually look at the registration list of the symposium and I see, okay, are most of our people coming from, soil and water conservation, or are most of them coming from natural resources, that kind of thing. And unfortunately, I had to narrow it down to 5. I always like to get, which county and what everybody does, but I'm very curious. I had to create some buckets here, and so they're very broad, and people like Dara, for example, they're probably spanning between these. I mean, it is going to be hard to pick in some cases. You're doing water monitoring, that might be public health, but you're working with natural resources, could be conservation. So when we talk about drainage, I'm thinking, you know, of our county surveyors, of course, but also the folks working for cities and towns doing urban stormwater. MS4 is a term that I hate to use because it's jargon, but other government services is broad. We had several, you know, executives. That is, we had state representatives that registered for the event today, and we've got all kinds of elected officials, county commissioners, mayors, that kind of thing. So, you know, your decisions that you make about the way land is managed in your geography that you're responsible for might place you in here. I'm thinking of, you know, engineering, transportation stuff, folks like Leah and I that do planning. I know we got floodplain managers on the webinar today, so there's a lot of different options, and it was difficult to make some buckets, but I'm always curious about, you know, just not just where folks are coming from, but the different ways in which we all affect watershed management. All right, and that is a very broad category. That's great. Hopefully everybody's seeing the results here. It looks like the by far the most people, almost half of our folks today, would place themselves in that conservation bucket, and my guess is that many of those people are also doing some of the other things as well. It's great to see some folks out there from drainage too, because so much of the work that I feel that we're kind of trying to champion with the River Basin Commission is related to drainage. And I had one other project that I was going to talk about, but it looks like I'm coming close to my time, and I think I'm going to stop with that. It is almost exactly 9:40. And so what we'd like to do, because these things are really hard to sit on, I do appreciate you guys bearing with me on this. I want to give you 5 minutes to get a coffee, bathroom break, that sort of thing. And I think 9:45 sharp, unless I hear back from Eric differently, we will turn this over to Eric, who's going to go through his inspiring presentation with us. I apologize for the wind noise too. You don't need to stick around here with me, but I am going to stay here until Eric gets going at 9:45. So you're going to put up with some more of this broken record. So go get your coffee, go to the bathroom, stop listening to me, and make yourself comfortable. Eric, I will check in with you as everything is going good on your end.
So far, so good.
I love Adam's comment, mentioned that refreshments aren't nearly as good this year. That is one of the best parts of the symposium typically, is we get to feed you guys. We always have a great little continental breakfast. And Adam, we will be doing that again, I promise. We're going to make this thing back to in person. And I hope so many people that were able to join us today as web participants can come and do it in person with us again. And we will treat you to some goodies when you come. You will probably have to listen to me longer. That's going to be one of the downsides to us getting back together. I had to dramatically condense my normal presentation. I wouldn't even call this a normal presentation, but whatever you want to call it, it was much shorter than I typically have. And I know that many of you are probably grateful for that. So I appreciate you guys putting up with the wind noise. I know it was a little bit loud at times during the presentation, but to me, I just wanted to be here on the river. I wanted to be here with this thing that I'm so connected to. So Leah is also mentioning that was always one of the nicest things we tried to. She mentioned missing the hike, missing the walk around through the gardens of Fernwood, or walking around the lake out at Pokagon State Park. We've always been so fortunate to hold the symposium, and that's largely due to Kieran and her efforts, vision early on, that we wanted to bring people to a place where nature was sort of part of it. And so we've always been able to hold the symposium at some really beautiful places and give folks the opportunity to explore after the event. Always try to hold it on a Friday so folks could check out from work early, go get some outdoors time in, and then enjoy the weekend. I do fully anticipate we will be back to doing that again. If anybody wants to communicate back to me, tell me to shut up, they can do that in the chat box. All right. How many times, oh my gosh. Leah has asked me how many times a week I'm out on the river. You mean how many times a day? week, probably 6 or 7 at this point, almost daily, because, you know, I go more than once sometimes. Now I got to admit, I'm a little ashamed of this, but I've actually gone outside the basin for some paddling trips in these last 2 months. I've been paddling so much and wanting to see some new water, and typically I go up into Michigan to do that. But Michigan's been pretty tight on travel restrictions. Even though what I'm doing is safe, I'm not coming into contact with anybody else, but I think they just don't want people traveling through the state. I know that it's arguable whether or not you can do it. You could probably get away with it, but I didn't want to push it, so I decided to use the opportunity to go down into Indiana, just outside the basin, explore the Eel River watershed. I know we got some folks that live close to that are on the webinar today, and the Tippecanoe River. Both I hadn't really spent much time on, and they're only about 45 minutes away from home, so I did get down and check out some rivers that don't flow to the St. Joe, and in fact don't even go to the Great Lakes, which is where I spend most of my time. So I went over the Continental Divide and got into the Mississippi Basin. So there's a question about can Benton Harbor get into the tree program? So I'm guessing that they're talking about the project that I was mentioning with GLRI. We did have to restrict it to smallish communities. I think Buchanan was the largest community. City of Angola is probably close. But unfortunately, that was limited in terms of what we were able to offer. So we didn't have any funding with this particular grant. But what's nice is that the consultants that we're working with, as well as Michigan DNR, some of the technology that we're using is something that the city could choose to purchase. And in fact, the communities that we're working with, although much of the work was funded with a grant, they have used some additional funds of their own to get started. So I see it's 9:45, and I'm gonna stop talking, move inside, and excited to hear Eric. So thanks so much, everybody. I'll be back for Q&A.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Eric Eckl. I'm the founder and owner of Waterwords That Work, and I want to thank Matt and the entire commission for having us present and help out with your virtual symposium. I was looking forward to coming out and seeing you all in person and doing the keynote in the big room with everybody, but strange times make for creative solutions, and I'm really impressed with how well everybody has managed to get into this webinar and how few tech support requests we're getting. And I'm going to just go ahead and jump into my remarks. So the title of this talk is The World Outside, What They Say About Why Your Work Matters. And at Waterwords That Work, we're a marketing and a public relations firm. I know it sounds strange to have a marketing and public relations person address the St. Joe Basin River Commission, but we work exclusively with environmental and natural resource organizations with water resource related missions. And we do it because, like Matt, we are all water people. We like to get out on the water in various ways and enjoy it. And we also do it because we really enjoy the clientele that you represent. The 80 some odd of you that have fought your way through the technical barriers to join us on this webinar, you have a rather unique perspective on both water, watersheds, nature, natural resources. You also have a rather unique perspective on people, and you're able to make connections that most of our fellow citizens just can't. I think every one of you on the webinar here would look at the picture of this young man enjoying his catch, and you would be able to recognize that there is a connection between the look of joy on that young man's face and the condition of wetlands along the stream many miles upstream from this lake or pond where it is that he's catching the fish. Most of the fellow citizens that you serve all throughout the area just can't do that. And I think every one of you here on the line would be able to see this image here of a young girl enjoying a fun afternoon on a hot summer day, and recognize that the ability of that household to use that water may depend on how certain dams are being operated, perhaps many hundreds of miles from the location of where that girl is. Most of the citizens that you serve, they just can't make that connection. And I bet every one of you on the line believes that every American child should be able to pull on the tap like you see here and enjoy a cool drink of safe water and have that be a safe thing to do. I bet all of you here on the webinar also recognize that whether or not that's safe may depend on a water utility's ability to raise enough revenue to maintain or expand or improve their water filtration and treatment systems. Many of the very same people who are paying those water bills don't recognize that connection. It takes a certain kind of character to do the watershed management work that you do. It takes a certain strength, a certain commitment, a certain stubbornness to keep coming back day after day, year after year, to deal with a seemingly intractable problem of a nearly limitless number of very small pollution sources like this storm drain right here. When you're in the environmental business, you have to deal with people at their worst. We have to deal with people at their most ignorant, their most selfish, and their most short-sighted. We are the ones who see the consequences when people are ignorant, selfish, and short-sighted. We confront it every day. And Aldo Leopold is once famous for saying that to have a conservation conscience is to walk alone through a world of wounds that no one else can see. If you're a river lover like Matt or me, you look at that dam and you realize that's a clog on the arteries of the land. But what most of your fellow citizens see is a pretty lake. So I use this image to represent the general public that you serve, the 1.5 million residents of the St. Joe River watershed. I'm going to use that word with you because you all know what it means. They don't see things the way that you do, but that doesn't mean that they don't appreciate what you do. And that's where I'm going to spend most of my time talking about it. But let's start with the first of several surveys that I'm going to cite for their insights. And so now this is from the Gallup poll, and they're the largest and best known of the polling firms in America. There's hundreds of pollsters in America, but they're the largest and best known. And just about every year they do an environmental survey in the spring, and here's one of the questions that they ask. I'm going to read you a list of environmental problems. As I read each one, please tell me if you personally worry about this problem a great deal, a fair amount, only a little, or not at all. It's a survey question. So imagine the folks back home, they're sitting on the couch, they're watching a Seinfeld rerun, they're up to their elbows in a bag of Fritos. A pollster calls them on the telephone and asks them this question. Well, here's the result of the most recently released survey, and it's starting to be a couple of years old, but this is from 2017, and they reported that in that survey, U.S. water pollution worries were at their highest since 2001. Concern about the environment has been rising since the start of this century, and at this point, concern about water pollution in particular is the highest that it's been in this century. Now, of course, this survey does predate the COVID-19 pandemic. But what you see here is that in a giant list of environmental problems, which goes way off below the bottom of your screen here, pollution of drinking water was #1, rising substantially even as recently as 2015 to 2016 to 2017, but rising over this entire period all the way on back to 2001. Pollution of drinking water is #1, and pollution of rivers, lakes, and reservoirs is #2 on a list of about 15 different environmental problems. Now, you might be surprised at this, but I'm not, because I've seen this in just about every survey on environmental issues that has come across my desk since the late 1990s. Water is always at the top of any list of environmental problems that we're asking people to weigh in about. So, the regular citizens out there, they can't make some of the connections that you make about their personal experience drinking, bathing, swimming, fishing, and the waterways that surround them. They just can't make those connections the way you do. They may not have the fortitude to muster up to address these problems on a consistent basis the way you do. But that doesn't mean that they don't care. So now if we were all in the room together, I would have you take a moment to shake the hands of the few people around you and thank you all, thank each other for the important work that you're doing on behalf of the American people, on behalf of the residents of the St. Joseph River Basin. Since we're doing this virtually, how about everybody take a minute to just shoot a thank you note to everybody using the chat feature? Go ahead and give yourselves a round of applause. I love seeing the chat box fill up with all that. Now, I know you don't hear that nearly often enough as you're going about and doing your jobs, and I'm going to talk a little bit about why that is and what we can do about it. But first, I'm going to tell you a couple of stories. Now, these are fictional stories, but they're hypothetical, but they are true in their essence. So this young woman that you see here, she's Vicky the volunteer. She's a sophomore in college. And she's out there with her professor, and they're out testing water quality in some tributary of the St. Joseph River. And it's a big commitment for her as a college student and a volunteer. She gets up once or twice a month early on a Saturday morning and heads out to the streams with her professor and her friends, and they collect bugs and water samples, and they feed that into a scientific matrix. Most of her friends are sleeping off the night before when they were having a big party. It's a big commitment for a young college student to do this. Now, this big commitment probably started with a much smaller commitment. Maybe when she was in high school, she went to summer camp and made birdhouses, and then she saw the birds using the birdhouses that she built. And she felt really good about that. Big commitments like you see here usually almost always start with a small commitment about which they felt great. And that small commitment started with some kind of a promotion that caught her attention, because there was a time when this young woman here had never even heard of watershed management, stream monitoring, pollution control. She had no idea that any of this work existed and was going on. What caught her eye? Maybe it was an email about the summer camp that she went to, or a flyer on the wall at the coffee shop about that summer camp, or an ad on her social media feed about that summer camp. Somehow, somebody caught her attention with that first opportunity, that easy thing to do that she then did and felt great about it, and that turned out to be her first step towards the moment that you see here on your screen. And here's Randy the rancher, and he's admiring a restored stream on his property. Until recently, the stream that you see here was trampled by his cattle. The creek was full of mud and full of manure and full of runoff of various kinds. There was hardly any fish in it. The water was dirty. It was ugly. And now here he is admiring the restored stream on his property, and he's feeling mighty good about that. Now, that's a big commitment. Even with the cost share and the technical assistance that many of you here on this webinar might be offering somebody like Randy, it's still a pretty big hassle. It's still a pretty big project. He probably still has to put some skin in the game financially, which is hard for farmers, particularly at times like these. But he went ahead and did it. Odds are this is not the first thing that he did for the environment. Like Vicky the volunteer, he also probably started kind of small. Maybe he started with something like a new crop rotation pattern, or he figured out some different ways of moving his cattle around so that they don't graze so heavily on the land. He started with something that didn't cost as much money, didn't take as much time, didn't frankly require him to think as hard. But once he did it, he saw an outcome from it. He felt really good about that. And then he wanted to move on up to the big accomplishment that you see right here. And before he did that small thing, somehow he had to become aware of that. Because for Randy the rancher here, there was a time, some point in his life, where he had no idea that there were things that he could do on his land that were going to perhaps improve his operation and perhaps improve the streams and the waterways that are flowing through his land. Somebody had to get his attention about that first step. And maybe it was a booth at the county fair, or maybe it was a letter that someone sent him, or a postcard. Maybe he saw something in the Farm Bureau newsletter, or he stopped in the NRCS office to pick up some information about another program, and there was a flyer on the wall. Maybe he was at a cocktail party and another landowner started somebody had to get his attention in the beginning and put that idea in his head for the very first time. And finally, here's Senator Bob Blowhard, and he's standing on the front steps of the U.S. Congress holding a press conference to take credit for putting money in the farm bill that paid Randy Rancher, helped pay Randy Rancher to restore that stream. So now Senator Blowhard's a good guy. He really did get that in there, but we know how politics works. Whose day is it really? It's hers. Sally, the staffer. The staff do almost all of the heavy lifting in the state houses in Lansing and in the Congress in Washington, D.C. She's the one who wrote the amendment to the Farm Bill, went around, made the rounds on Capitol Hill to get others to get on board. She rolled the logs, she twisted the arms, she cut the deal. It's really her day. She's giving her boss all the credit because that's what those staff people are trained to do from their earliest time. So now this is her big moment here. This is her big accomplishment, but it probably started smaller for her too. Perhaps her first real conservation moment was when she was an intern working in Representative Blowhard's office. And so she's sitting at the front desk and she answers the phone and she greets the visitors that come in. And in come a couple of volunteers from the Isaac Walton League to talk about the problems that they're having with some of their land. They have a shooting range which is starting to fall apart. Those guys somehow made a really good first impression. And they managed to help this young intern, at the time, a young intern, much earlier in her career than you see her today, that she could make a difference. And so perhaps she drafted up a letter for Representative Blowhard to sign to the Interior Department, or who knows later. 6 months later, she's standing at the ribbon cutting for the newly unveiled Bob Blowhard Historic Shooting Range, and she is feeling great about that first accomplishment of hers that led her to the moment where they're putting millions in the Farm Bill for land conservation. And what was that first impression? It was that moment when those Isaac Walton League guys came in and made the case, and they were polite, and the case that they made was clear. She understood what she could do, and the next thing you know, she's starting down the road. Now, those stories are different, but they actually unfolded all the same way, because that is how it almost always unfolds. All of you that are here on this webinar are here because you've made a pretty substantial commitment to the St. Joseph River. It's probably not your first commitment to the environment. Maybe, but probably not. The way these stories usually go is they start, let's just imagine someone has never given a moment's thought to what they can do that's going to improve some kind of waterway somewhere. They have to get some kind of a first exposure, a conversation with a friend or a colleague, an email, an advertisement, a brochure that they pick up, something that arrives in their mail, something that they see on social media, something that they see on the news, a sign by the river when they're taking a walk. There's some kind of a first exposure that for whatever reason gets through to them and gets their attention. That first exposure leads to some kind of a first taste, some kind of small, easy commitment that makes a very small difference, but it's pretty easy for them to do. And then they feel really good about it, and they start to have some kind of a change of heart. That small thing that they did was very rewarding, and they want to feel even more of that rewarding feeling, and then that's how they move on to the kinds of big contributions that we just saw in those three stories, the kinds of things that most of you here on the webinar have as a rewarding part of your life. You didn't start all the way at the level that you're at. You got there from some first impression that got through to you, some first taste that got the hook set, and that made you crave more of that good feeling, that led you to where you are here today. So why don't we have more stories like that? If this is how it almost always goes, why aren't more people taking that same journey along with the rest of us? Now, at Waterwords at Work, we're a public relations firm. We're very focused at our work on that first impression and that first taste. That's where we are putting most of our attention. And we see our clients time and time again getting things kind of out of order and getting tangled up a little bit. And the first place that that happens is here in the beginning. Conservation organizations, environmental organizations are not very good at getting that first impression. We don't know how to put our message in front of people who aren't already thinking about us. If they're already interested, they step forward and raise their hand and express interest, we're there. But if they haven't heard of us, if they're not thinking about us, we're not very good at getting that first exposure. And then even when we do, a lot of times it's so detailed, it's so technical, it's so deep in the weeds of our professional world that the first impression that we get isn't very good. This is how a lot of environmental organizations try to make that first impression. Set up a booth at a public event, pass out pieces of paper, chat with the people that walk by. Now, this is a fine way to meet a few people. But if you compare the attendees at the events that you go to the population that you're trying to reach, you will very quickly realize that this takes a lot of time to potentially make a first impression on a very small number of people. It's easy to do. Round up some materials, grab a table, head down to the event. If you're not a specialist in marketing and outreach, this is a pretty easy thing to do, but it just doesn't reach that many people. And in the modern world, for just about everything else, that first impression is coming through some kind of a screen. It's some kind of electronic tickle that brings us into most of the things that we do. So now a second area where we see our conservation organization clients getting tangled up is that first taste. It's that first taste. You know, we're kind of an old school values that we represent here, and we think back fondly to a time when kids grew up hunting and fishing with their family. They had that great kind of a firsthand experience in nature back during their formative years and formed a very deep bond. That's a great way for people to get their first introduction. So we try and make up for that with educational workshops and seminars that are a pretty good substitute. But again, we have a very high quality experience for these young people right here, but it's a very small number relative to the population of the watershed as a whole. Time and time again, we see the conservation organizations gravitating towards things that are very in-depth, and they reach a very small number of people. Now, these events are totally great, but it's a commitment of many hours to pull this off, and somebody maybe has to jump in a car and drive to a location that you have selected for them, on a date that you have selected for them, on a time that you have selected from them. And all of those things greatly limit your participation. You pick the date, you pick the time, you pick the location, you set the length. It's usually several hours, and every time you're doing that, you're reducing the number of people who might potentially get involved. In the modern world, many of us have grown used to our first exposure to any activity or any cause being digital. With you've seen these buttons more times than you could possibly count. Donate, take action, share, add to your calendar, become a member, make a donation, shop. Your fellow citizens have gotten used to the idea that their first involvement with any topic, any organization, any company, any campaign, any cause can occur online. It can occur at the time and the place of their choosing, and it will only take a few minutes. To increase the number of people who end up at the end of this journey doing big things for the St. Joseph River, it's helpful to think about getting more people to start that journey with something that's easy, something that's convenient, something they can do from their own home, like what you see on the screen here and all of the others. So now, according to the Gallup poll, water pollution concerns are as high as they have been in this century. They've been rising since the turn of the century, and before the COVID outbreak, they were at their peak. Now, I've been looking at this kind of survey data for a long time, and I am pretty confident that the COVID outbreak has rocketed to the top of everyone's concerns. I'm also pretty confident that water pollution concerns remain fairly high, and they will rise again as the pandemic eases and we move beyond it into something more resembling normal life. What I have seen over the years is things like 9/11, things like the Great Recession. They rocket to the top of everybody's conscious for a short period of time, and then they fade. Meanwhile, water pollution concerns seem remarkably stable. There are modest fluctuations over the years and over the decades, but I am pretty confident that many of your residents that you serve don't like water pollution, are at least somewhat concerned about it, and that concern will be kind of stable. And if I could see all your faces on the webcam, I know that many of you would be looking at me like this, with like this doubtful look, like, hey, I do this work every day. I'm out and about in my community every day. And based on what you're telling me these polls say, shouldn't the people be throwing rose petals at my feet as I walk down the street because I'm the one who's trying to give them the clean water that they say is so important? Well, one of the things that I've learned over the years is that we see those numbers about the importance that people place on various issues, and we tend to misread that, or we tend to assume it means things that it doesn't. And I'm going to now take a little tour through what other surveys and polls tend to reveal about what that number does mean and what it doesn't mean. And I'm going to start with some of the things that we wish that it meant, but it doesn't. People care a lot about the water. So does that mean that they want to know who's looking out for their water? You think it would mean that, but it really doesn't. I'll give you a couple of examples. So now this is a survey from a firm called Responsive Management. And Responsive Management is a polling firm that specializes in natural resources, the same way we're a market research firm that specializes in natural resources. And they did a survey of residents of the Southeast. This is where I grew up, right about there in Atlanta. And Avia, my project manager, is right about there in Savannah at the moment. And this is a part of the country where participation in hunting, fishing, and outdoor recreation is really high. Only in the Rocky Mountain West is it higher than you see in the Southeast. Participation in shooting sports is so high in my home state of Georgia that the little town of Kennesaw, which is right about here when I was in high school, passed a law saying that every resident of the city had to own a firearm. That did not withstand a court challenge, but it tells you about how Southerners feel about their shooting sports. And yet, despite that, in this survey from Responsive Management, we found that only 20% of Southern residents can volunteer the correct name of their state fish and wildlife agency. 80% can't name the agency that issues their hunting and fishing licenses, or they butcher it beyond recognition. Only 1 out of 5 can say the name of their state fish and wildlife agency, even though many more than that are buying hunting and fishing licenses just about every year. How can that be? Here's another example. So this is an older one, but I really love this finding. So this is a survey from Roper Starch, which is my favorite polling firm, actually. And they did a survey called Recreation in America, asking people about their outdoor recreation habits. And one of the questions that they asked is, have you personally enjoyed public lands managed by one of these agencies in the last 12 months? And a lot of Americans remembered in this survey that they had visited various public lands, and the top of the list of the lands that they remember visiting is the National Park Service. Almost a quarter of them remembered visiting a national park in the last year. Only 4% of them remembered visiting a reservoir or a campground or something managed by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in that same time period. What's remarkable about that is that if you look at actual visitation numbers, these two things should be reversed. The lakes and reservoirs managed by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers actually get far more visitors than the units of the National Park Service, which means that there are millions of Americans every summer that are saddling up, putting the jet skis on the trailer, putting the tent in the back of the pickup truck, driving down to their local Army Corps of Engineers reservoir, paying for their campsite, picking up the brochure, using the boat launch, and everywhere they're doing this, they see that little red castle logo from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and after they're done enjoying that U.S. Army Corps of Engineers reservoir, a pollster calls them on the phone and says, "Have you visited any public lands?" And they're like, "Yeah, National Park." How can that be? How can that possibly be? There's really only one explanation. They don't care. They really don't care. The public tells us that clean water is important, but that doesn't mean that they're really interested in the distinctions among all of the different organizations that are on the phone. The state Forest Service versus Smokey the Bear, the National Forest Service versus the St. Joseph River Basin Commission versus the Town Wastewater Committee. That's all just not what they're really interested in. Now, please don't take that personally, because what surveys show time and time again is that the average American is actually really confused about the difference between their local government, their state government, and the federal government. Most of your fellow citizens just have a really hard time distinguishing between who's who, even at the level of local, state, and federal. And then when you want to then missionize that and make it about this state water agency versus that federal land agency versus this county public works agency, they tune out. They care about the water. They want it to be clean. They don't want to get drawn into name recognition of the various players working to keep it clean. That's a trap. You can spend a ton of time and effort trying to build your name recognition, but that only meets your needs. That doesn't really meet their needs. All right, here's that next wrong conclusion that we tend to jump to. Does the Gallup survey mean they'll stop complaining when we try and do something to protect the water? I wish. You think that if people care as much about clean water as the polls say they do, that they would give you a little bit more benefit of the doubt when you try and fix some of these problems. What do surveys say about why that is? If they think it's so important that we get the water clean, why do they fight you when you do that? Well, so this is a survey also from Responsive Management, if I recall correctly, and this is a survey of water utility customers, and they asked the customers how they felt about the quality of the information coming about the safety of their tap water, specifically those water quality reports that the water utilities here on the line have to publish on an annual basis. And I have seen those reports. They're incredibly detailed. They're super hard to read. I know you have to do it because EPA makes you do it that way. There are alternatives to make them better, but they are excessively detailed, and as a result, almost 1 in 5 water utility customers are completely dissatisfied with the information they are getting about the quality and safety of their tap water. 1 in 5 completely dissatisfied. Now that's a problem, and we can help you fix that. That's the kind of, those are the kinds of poor satisfaction numbers that good, clear communication can improve. But we can't make it go to 0. So here we are back down in the Southeast again, and what do we see? That only 2% of the residents of the Southeast report that they are very dissatisfied with their state Fish and Wildlife Agency. That's a much more acceptable number, 2% very satisfied. 18% very satisfied, very dissatisfied is a problem. 2% very dissatisfied is the norm. And note that it's not zero, and it's never zero, and it's never gonna be zero. There's nothing in my bag of tricks, no matter how well you communicate about the work that you do, no matter how well you do the work you do, no matter how well you communicate about it, there's no way that we're gonna get it all the way down to zero. Because at the end of the day, good work and good communication about the work doesn't help you with people like this. I'm angry about life, and I have a computer and a phone. Doing good work and doing good communications about the work doesn't help you with people like this. I have an anxiety condition and a computer and a phone. There's a certain number of people out there who are just really unhappy. That's just all there is to it. There's a certain percentage of the people out there who are really unhappy, and they take it out on lots of people, including you. If you're in the water business, you're in the public business, you raise your hand, you try and make something happen in the community, you try and make something happen for the good of the community, and a small number of people are going to come out of the woodwork, and they are going to vent their frustration at you, and most often that frustration is actually coming from within. It's coming from their own internal unhappiness, and there's no amount of good work, there's no amount of good communication about your good work that is going to substitute for therapy or medication, which is what some people really are needing. So the public says that water is important. They say that clean water is important. That's not going to stop some of them for taking their personal problems out on you when you raise your hand, appear in their lives, trying to do something about something that they actually kind of think is important. Just how it's going to be. Another common misperception. If people are telling the Gallup poll that clean water is important to them, does that mean they're going to talk a lot about it? I go to the local bar at happy hour, no one's talking about watershed management. Well, I wish it meant that, but it doesn't. And part of the reason that it doesn't is something that's within our control. So now let's imagine this young man who's about to catch his very first fish in the St. Joseph River. Let's just pretend that's the St. Joseph River. It might be, I'm not sure. Now, a lot of times, environmental professionals like ourselves, we're like that young man, and here's why. That young man has tossed his water in for the line for the very first time, and what's he going to do when he gets that first nibble? When he gets that first nibble, odds are he's going to yank that fishing rod back and pull the hook right out of the fish's mouth. We do that a lot too. That's a metaphor for how environmental professionals often respond to the general public. We're out dealing with a regular citizen, not an environmental insider. They give us that first tickle of interest in the work that we do, and we jump straight to the professional level of detail using language like watershed stewardship ethic, leaving this gentleman quite puzzled. Phase 3 whip, leaving this poor woman quite puzzled. Flocculation, leaving this gentleman quite puzzled. It's really common. I see it all the time. A regular person, a regular voter, taxpayer, citizen, homeowner shows the slightest bit of interest in the work that one of us does, and we start hitting them with all of this kind of language. And when we hit people with a lot of new language, they're not going to go to the happy hour or family dinner for Thanksgiving or to the baseball game with their friends and start throwing these words around. They just won't do it. They're afraid that they'll use them wrong and they'll look foolish. So the public tells us that clean water is important, and they mean it, but that doesn't mean that they want to learn a lot of professional language for a job that they don't actually have. So what does it mean? You think if people are as worried about water pollution as they say they are, that ought to put a little wind in our sails somehow, because they're worried about water pollution, they're worried about the condition of their lakes and streams. We're trying to fix that. How does that put wind in our sails if it's not in the ways that we just thought? Well, it means that if you take your message to them, they'll respond well. And I'm going to share with you a mix of examples from both our work and some of the others that we've observed where we're able to get some numbers. Many of you are engineers or scientists and you appreciate numbers. There's a lot of numbers in marketing and communication. I'm going to share some with you. We use a lot of benchmarks. So let's talk about email. What I see here, what you have here on the screen, this is an email from the Red Cross. The Red Cross emails me constantly because I'm O negative. I'm a universal donor. So they are constantly trying to get me in there so they can stick a needle in my arm. Now the benchmark for how many people open emails from big nonprofit organizations like the Red Cross, like Heifer International, like the ACLU, like the Nature Conservancy, like Habitat for Humanity. The average across all of those organizations is that about 11% of the emails that they send get opened. 90% of those emails get deleted. How about water organizations? We have access to the email performance of dozens of watershed organizations, land trusts, et cetera, like here, this is the Katy Prairie Conservancy. And the email open rate is much higher. For small watershed organizations, land trusts, environmental groups, we see that the open rate on their emails is about 25%, more than twice as high as the open rate for large, distant nonprofit organizations, even though they're good causes. Because people care about the water, they're almost twice as likely to open an email about their local water as they are from all these other good causes. Talk about direct mail, postcards, and letters. Rule of thumb in the industry varies widely, of course, but the rule of thumb is that the response rate for letters and postcards is about 1%. 100 letters go out, 99 of them end up in the recycling bin. One of them gets a response. If you're doing better than 1%, that's good. If you're doing worse than 1%, that's in the normal range, even though it's a disappointment. About 1% is normal. Now, we had a client, Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, and they had a program where they would help residents plant trees on their residential properties within city limits. And they had very few takers. It's a great program. You call up the tree commission, they'll send someone out to your house, they'll negotiate with you what kind of tree to plant and where, and once you approve it, they come in and plant the tree. You don't have to do much other than approve it. All the work gets done by the city. And they had very few takers. And they were convinced that no one in the city wanted to have a tree in front of their house. And so they brought us in to help, and I said, well, I think that many of your residents just don't realize that that opportunity is there. And like, oh, no, everybody knows about it. Really? How have you promoted this program? We have a brochure on the rack at City Hall. And if you go crawling through our website and you know what you're looking for, you might be able to find it. I'm like, well, that's not really much promotion. I bet most residents don't even realize this option is there. So they gave us a little benefit of the doubt, and we put together a mailer here, and we put together door hangers. And so we sent mail and put door hangers in the neighborhoods where they were most interested in seeing some more trees get planted. And here are the results. If a typical response rate to a direct mail, postcard, or letter is 1%, we got a 6% response rate to our letters and door hangers about street trees. Because it's about the water, because it's about the neighborhood, because it's environmental, the response rate was way high compared to all the direct mail we get for all the other things. Now, this is an ad on Facebook. If you're anywhere like me, you've been spending a lot more time on Facebook during the quarantine than you were before, and you've probably seen dozens of ads like this. At any given moment, you're seeing one or two of them. Now, the typical response rate to these ads on Facebook is crazy low. The way that Facebook works is you show your ads to a whole bunch of people for very little money at all, and almost all of them ignore it. That's the way that that game is played. The response rate, the typical response rate for a Facebook ad is way less than 1%. But the Georgia Water Coalition, which is not our client, put some Facebook ads out there about the water and to try and get people animated to speak up about some threats to the groundwater in the state of Georgia. And look what they found. Their response rate was almost twice the average of what you see on Facebook generally. Because it's about the water, the response rate was actually over 1%. Now, that's what these three examples have in common. If your message is about the water, the rate at which people respond is likely to be higher, might well be higher than the average rate at which they respond to all of the other things that are competing for their attention. That's how they show you that they care about the water the way that they tell the pollsters do. They respond to a message that is well crafted, clear, uses language that they understand, and is delivered to their doorstep. Then they respond. If you take your message to the people about the water, they're more likely to notice it, and they're more likely to respond to it than they are about many other things that are competing for their attention. So how many people are there, and who is the most responsive? So this is the St. Joseph River watershed, a word that I would encourage you not to use outside of these professional circles, but this is a professional webinar, so it's fine. And I spent a little time with the U.S. Census, and for these 15 counties, I found that the population is a little over 1.5 million. Now, of course, we are about to do an updated census, so these numbers may change in the next few months, but this is the information that is available to us currently. 1.5 million people in the St. Joseph River watershed. How many of them are extra concerned about this? Well, I asked Facebook. So I went into Facebook and I went into the advertising module and dialed up how many Facebook users are there out of these 1.5 million? And out of those Facebook users, how many of them have a special interest in the St. Joseph River, in the environment generally? And here's what I found. So out of 1.5 million residents of the area, I found that 940,000 of them have a Facebook account. So that works out to about 70% of adults over the age of 18. 70% of adults over the age of 18 have a Facebook account. And out of that, basically half, 460,000, are interested in nature, according to Facebook. 170,000 of them are interested in wildlife, according to Facebook. And 84,000 of them are interested in conservation or the environment. So somewhere between 7 and 8% of your population are seriously extra interested, way more than most, in conservation and the environment. And then I looked at it in a different way. So this is called My Axiom Partner, and they are a data mining firm. If you buy things with your credit card and you use loyalty cards and subscribe to magazines and all those sorts of things, all of that information finds their way to firms like this one, and they tell you how many people then you buy and rent mailing lists from them. So here's what they had to say about the 15 counties. Out of those 15 counties, there were a little over 300,000 out of 1.5 million that were especially interested in the outdoors and there's 92,000 of them that are especially interested in environmental issues. So there are significant minorities, large, good-sized minorities of residents in this basin who have an extra high interest in the St. Joseph River and the environment. And using modern marketing and outreach tools, you can direct your messages to those people specifically. You can highly target the people who are the most interested and get your response rates to your various efforts to get them involved up even higher. Now remember those three stories that I started the presentation with: Vicki the volunteer, Randy the rancher, and Sally the congressional staffer. Those people are well positioned and they are receptive. And using tools like I just showed you here, you can target your messages and try and make those first impressions on those who are most receptive, so they can have that good first small experience and move their way up into that big commitment, the thing that really makes the difference. And so what? It's hard work. I get it. In the middle of this pandemic, you guys are still coming in and trying to get it all done. Why does all of this matter really fundamentally? And for this, I'm going to go back to my favorite survey, the Roper Starch poll. How we go about, what does it mean? Why do we go to all this trouble to make that first impression on people, to give them their first taste of environmental protection, let them have, so they can have a change of heart and move on to those big things that make a real difference. So here's the survey that I'm referring to, and they asked a really important question, and the answers to this question will really inspire you, I think. And so here is the question as they wrote it. Do you remember spending time outdoors with your family as a significant part of your childhood? Do you remember spending time outdoors with your family as a significant part of your childhood? Some people answered yes to this question, and some people answered no to this question. And the people who answered yes to this question turned out really differently from the people who answered no. And I think you will be both inspired and a little dismayed by it. So the people who answered yes to that question, almost half of them, 48%, told the pollster that they were completely satisfied with the family and the friends that they had made over the course of their life, whereas just a third of those who weren't outside with their families as kids would say the same thing. 15, 20, 30, 50 years later, spending that time outside with their family has helped these adults be happier with the family and the friends that they have made over the course of their entire lives. "15, 20, 30 years later, those who remembered spending time outside with their families as kids are much more likely to be satisfied with their careers than those who don't have those memories. 15, 20, 30, 50 years later, those who remember spending time outside with their families as kids are much more likely to be satisfied with the quality of their life than those who didn't have that experience. What those survey results are telling us is that healthier, happier, more productive lives start here. They start outside as children with the family, paddling, skipping rocks, catching fish, wading in the water and making dams, looking at birds, strolling in the park, riding your bike on the bike path. All of those things, if they're done young, they're done with the family as children, that is helping those children grow up to be happier, healthier, better adjusted, more productive adults. And that's the work that you are all up to. At some level, that is the big ultimate benefit that you are delivering for keeping the rivers clean, for keeping them accessible, for helping people experience and enjoy that, helping families in particular experience and enjoy that. Healthier, happier lives start on the creek. Healthier, happier lives start out in the cornfields. Healthier, happier lives start on the lakeshore with the family. So never doubt that a small group of thoughtful and committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. That's, of course, a famous quote from Margaret Mead. It is also, according to all of the market research that I spend my day studying, absolutely true. It's not just an aspirational statement, it's the absolute truth. And if you look at the numbers of people in your watershed, as Facebook tells us, as Axiom tells us, there are large minorities. Seems like a small number, but it's a small group of thoughtful and committed citizens who can change the world if you take your message to them, if you make it clear and compelling to them, and if you make it easy for them to take that very first step about which they can feel great. So thank you for all that you do and all the time that you have that you have given us this morning, bearing with us as we take a really fun in-person event and try and turn it into a really fun virtual event. We're going to take your questions. Hopefully you have been submitting that using the chat feature, and we have been recording your questions here, and we will take any of them that come. Matt, would you like to take a couple of minutes to let the attendees know about some of the other opportunities that are coming up?
Yeah, well, I mean, in particular, are you talking about the in-depth online trainings we're going to get into, or are you talking about just in general in our watershed, any kind of events that might be coming up?
Talking about the training that we'll be offering virtually.
Okay, great. So as I sort of alluded to in the emails and teased you all with, if you've stuck around this long, I want to let you know that we've partnered with Eric's company, and part of I guess maybe one of the benefits of not having to pay for those refreshments that Adam missed so much is that we had a little additional money in our budget that Eric was kind enough to work with us on, and we're going to be offering 3 series. Each one of these 3 sort of topic areas will have 3 trainings that will be hosted online, and they're going to be free to you all as members and partners of the St. Joe River Basin Commission. So Eric can tell us, I mean, there are a lot of different things. We put out a survey, and many of you were kind enough to give us some feedback on what you'd like to see. Eric's company offers a ton of different training options, and we got some really good feedback. I would say that the water words that work is always one of the most popular, and was on our survey the most popular. People were definitely interested in outreach projects, and project management also ranked really high. It was sort of interesting to see that climate change, which I was kind of excited to climate change messaging, I guess. I was excited to see that one didn't rank as high with our survey respondents. But what did was serving underserved populations, which was good to see. And then something Eric brought up in his talk was the social marketing. So the social side of social marketing, and that was certainly popular. So we'll be sort of putting our heads together and sending out an email announcement following the symposium today with the offerings. It was overwhelming preference for hosting them once a week for 3 weeks. So each one of these 3 topic areas we will try to offer as a one-day session for 3 consecutive weeks. Hopefully on a Thursday, Wednesday, or Tuesday, as those seem to be the most popular. We'll be looking at this month, May, and then into June if necessary. So stay tuned to your email. All registrants will get an announcement about that. I'll send it out to the larger list as well. Eric, I don't know if you want to add anything about the trainings themselves and kind of what folks would expect on those. How long are they, that kind of thing?
So each of the webinar trainings each topic is a series of 3 90-minute trainings that we'll use via Zoom and the various chat and interactive features. They're highly participatory. This is kind of a keynote style concept where I do most of the talking and you do most of the listening. When we do the trainings, there will be lots of exercises and participatory options for everyone. And I hope that we're going to make our final determinations here in the next few days about which trainings to offer and what times to offer them. But I hope you'll make the time to join us.
All right, Eric, did we have, so I'm trying to check the Google Doc here and see if we had any other questions that came in. Oh, I did see, Krista, Did you see Krista's question there?
Yeah, we've got a couple of questions. So
Okay, cool.
Krista said, we have a great point about first exposure. We struggle with this. Yes, conservation and environmental organizations really struggle with how to get a message in front of people the very first time. Where are the best places in a time of selected news viewing? Well, there are lots of great options, and you get your best results when you are able to then highly target. So it may not be apparent to you as a consumer, but when you are receiving your electronic messages, the ads that you see on YouTube, the ads that you see on Facebook, those are targeted to you as an individual. Your neighbor doesn't necessarily see them. Your sister, your brother, or your friend, or your spouse don't necessarily see the same ads that you are seeing. They have been targeted to you through these platforms using some of the kinds of techniques that I alluded to briefly in our remarks. We find there's no guarantee that any one thing is going to work. There's a lot of trial and error in the public relations and marketing business. At this time, highly targeted Facebook ads are our most consistently successful outreach tool. That and email. Email and highly targeted Facebook ads are the most consistently successful things that we do. Everything else that we try succeeds sometimes and fails sometimes. And of course, email and social media also fail sometimes, but they are most likely to be successful because you can highly target who receives that message.
Eric,
so got another question from Krista. Feedback and ideas about exposure and engagement efforts like the YouTube beach cleanup trend for a year or so ago. So I'm not aware of the YouTube beach cleanup trend, so I don't know how to comment on that. But I would say that what I see conservation organizations often trying to do is get their entire agenda accomplished through that message. And the way a marketer and public relations person tends to think is that message is a teaser to bring them back to a website where they can acquire more information and then respond in some way. They donate, they register for an event, they sign up for a newsletter, they sign a petition or fill out a public comment, or they enter a contest. The messages that go out are really just teasers to bring someone back to a place where they can acquire a slightly larger teaser and then take that first simple step. Whereas what we see many of our conservation peers doing is trying to get the whole thing accomplished in a YouTube video, or stuff it all into an email, or stuff it all into a Facebook meme or something, and then there's no next step from that message, and that's less effective.
Eric, I think one of the things that Krista was referring to with the beach stuff is just this idea of or the beach YouTube videos was the thing, but it's almost like getting that snapshot of you picking up the trash, like the cold water challenge or something, and you know, that's sort of becoming a thing, like to get your picture of you doing your part, picking up a piece of trash. And for me, like I mentioned to her, come to mind was you know, out there in your kayak, hey, exploring new water, or picking up this piece of trash off the river or something, whether that could become a thing, like where we as the entity tries to promote this idea of send us your picture, we'll host it here, or we'll, you know, that kind of thing is what I think she was sort of referring to.
Fair enough. So we have a question from Rachel. So are these stats corrected for socioeconomic status? If not, I would argue this is potentially correlation and not causation. So I think she's referring to these slides right here, and these ones right here. And yes, Rachel, I think it is fair to describe those as correlation, not necessarily causation, although there are other research that do imply some causation in that. But based on the results of this survey, correlation is a fair way to describe that.
Eric, I would ask, and this is something that Leah brought up, and I mentioned earlier of not using that word watershed. We kind of joked around about it. Is basin any better? Is there any words that are better for describing natural resource boundaries?
There's not one clean substitute for watershed that gets you the response that you are looking for. Most of the time, if there's professional language and you're looking for a substitute, it actually needs to turn into a sentence. You replace a piece of jargon with a full sentence that explains the key concept. So you would say, we're trying to clean up the St. Joseph River and all of the streams that feed into it. And then you have described the watershed concept. It's longer, but it's clear. And most of the time, what professional jargon like watershed is it's because we're professionals and we're going to say this over and over and over again, we take a whole sentence and we turn it into one word. That's what we do. That's what professional jargon is. When we go back out to the public, we've got to take that one word and turn it back into a sentence, like the St. Joseph River and all the streams that feed into it.
Great point. I think it's one I often say of the St. Joseph River and all the land that drains to it is something similar, I guess.
Yeah, something along those lines.
We got a question from Gary.
We do our work up and down the St. Joseph River and along all the streams that flow into it. You know, there's your watershed concept in a way that people can understand.
Exactly. That's good. Gary, your question's definitely a big one, and looking for opportunities in these big events. And I've been thinking and talking about this a lot myself, and in hopes that, you know, the one thing that I've heard is the sort of awareness of a oneness among all of us people with the COVID pandemic, and how critical each one of our behaviors is to the whole, in getting us to think about that in many other things like watershed management, for example. So I hope it can lead to some new opportunities.
So we have a question from Zach, who mentions that about half of the population of LaGrange is made up of the Amish. And do we have any tips for that? Well, the short answer is yes. And the long answer is too many to use in a Q&A. So Zach, what I would encourage you to do is reach out to Matt and make a request that we do the Closing the Deal with Rural Landowners training, because in the past 2 years, we spent a lot of time working with conservation specialists who have a lot of experience working with the plain sect. So that's the Amish and the Mennonites. And we got quite an earful about what they feel is necessary to work successfully with Amish and Mennonites. We've got quite a bit of information to share on that topic, but it's actually too much to offer as a pat answer in a Q&A session. So if that's the content you're looking for, let Matt know, and perhaps that'll be one of the options that we offer in the weeks to come.
Thanks, Eric, and thanks, Zach. Zach's one of our members, LaGrange County Surveyor, and the rural training, the Closing the Deal, that training was definitely one that was, as you can imagine, hot and cold. So our folks that come from the more urban environments, you know, not interested, but the folks who are working with soil and water conservation, of course, it ranked really high. And so given how important that is, I could definitely see that being one of the three. So hopefully we'll be able to do that.
Does an event like a pandemic change the propensity for the disinterested majority to be open to new messages? Is there a change in values established in youth that opens a new, larger window of communication success? So that's from Gary. So that's a great question, Gary. I wish I had a very simple answer for you on that. What I do know is that when things like 9/11 or the Great Recession come, they scramble the public opinion map for a time, and then it tends to revert back to the baseline. And is it possible that the public has become sensitized to the need for good testing to detect health threats earlier than before? You would think, okay, so all of a sudden there's not enough tests. That's why we can't get this pandemic under control. We should be testing the water so the next pandemic doesn't come rising out of the water. It's really easy to assume that that would be the case. And I think for a year or maybe two, depends on how long this pandemic takes to resolve itself and for life to go back to normal, you might find that there are those who are receptive to that kind of argument. But eventually this pandemic is going to fade into the rearview mirror, the same way that 9/11 did, the same way that the Great Recession did, and attitudes about water and the environment will revert back to some kind of a norm where people are concerned about the environment. They're especially concerned about the water within that environment. And our real challenge is, how do we tell our story to them in a way that they understand and there's a way to respond to? Because what our community fails to do is that we give them too much information and not enough real option to act on what we give them in a way that is easy and simple enough that they can actually do it. We tend to imagine that they might go from sitting on the couch having never thought about what they could do about the water to joining a board of directors or coming out and testifying at a public meeting or writing a letter using their own words to an elected official. We tend to put them in a place where we need them to go from 0 to a lot, and they can't do it. And a lot of times the story that we tell them about why they even should, they can't follow it. That's the kind of the baseline situation. And at some point when the pandemic passes, we will revert to that.
Really interesting example that you gave there, Eric, about the testing and the sensing. It's something that's coming front and center. I was just on a webinar yesterday about a big National Science Foundation grant opportunity to sort of create some pilot projects with highly monitored watersheds to both do flood prediction and also be able to address water quality issues, soil moisture sensors, stream gauges, really heavily monitored system, not that unlike what the city of South Bend has done with their sewer system, but on a much bigger and rural landscape. So who knows, maybe there could be more of an appreciation for that kind of monitoring following something like this.
Do we have any new questions coming in?
I don't think so. It doesn't look like it. If anybody's got any, give them now, or 2 hours on a webinar is pushing it. So don't blame everybody for being ready to.
We've only lost a couple of people over the whole time period, Matt. This is a really good group.
Incredible. Thank you. It's pretty incredible. I am so proud of all of you for sticking with us. Well, great presentation, Eric. I always love hearing your message. This is the 3rd time I've heard it, and I try hard. Martin, you know, amen to your jargon talk, and that's something that stuck with me for a long time. So thanks for everything you've done.
Thank you all for your time this morning. We'll be back in touch with the training schedule and the times and the registration opportunities, and we're looking forward to having you join us.
Sounds good. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for all of our panelists and all the River Basin members and the elected officials, all that. Thank you so much.